Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Ethicast session. I'm Archie Maharaj, and joining me is my colleague,
Bill Coffin, editor-in-chief of Ethicast Magazine and co-host of the Ethicast.
It's so great to have you all back here. We're about to unpack our last keynote, which was on ethical and inclusive storytelling, led by Julie Ann Crommet, founder and CEO of Collective Moxie. So with that, Bill, what do you have for us?
Oh man, this is probably my favorite session of the day. As a storyteller myself, I really engaged with this one. Just an amazing amount of content. Also, frankly, I'm a fan of all of the work that Julianne has actually worked on. She's worked on a bunch of, every blockbuster you've seen, from Wreck-It Ralph to The Eternals to Black Panther to Coco to Encanto, all sorts of amazing movies, and all movies that have put in an amazing amount of work on making sure that the stories are told with inclusivity in mind from the ground up, so that no audience is excluded.
And just as Julie said, we're all storytellers every day. Mm-hmm. This is something that we have to keep in mind as we share our experiences, as we create safe spaces for our colleagues and employees. It's all about storytelling and embracing that narrative.
It is, and she shared with us some of her own personal narrative as well about how, as a child, she had a hard time seeing her own, representation of herself in the media around her, and how important that is, and how you see oneself. And it wasn't until 2006 when she saw herself in the show Ugly Betty, where she really got that sense of true, drama representation. And it's an amazing story to hear, because for a lot of us, we don't have to have that talent of finding ourselves in the media that we consume. And so I think it's an amazing story that you shared.
Mm-hmm. So with that, Bill, I'm curious to know, so to pull all of this together, we want to connect the dots here. So How does what Julie Ann shared in terms of promoting diversity and inclusiveness in storytelling, how does that translate into compliance and what compliance leaders do every day?
Well, that's a fantastic question, because really what she was talking about, I think, was a lot about how do you address unconscious bias, right? Here it was in the storytelling process. And when you're making a movie, it's a highly collaborative process. There's many stages, a lot of people getting involved. So a lot of effort has to go in to making sure that everybody is addressing their unconscious bias at different levels of the project. We talk about that quite a lot on a much broader scale in the ethics and compliance space. We talk about how does unconscious bias qualify things like who do you train, how do you hire, how do you promote, how do you build your training and communications program, how do you look at your own culture? Is the culture that you hold up, is that itself an inherently biased mechanism, and is it enforcing or reinforcing certain inequities in your workplace? And being able to address that unconscious bias requires a willingness to stop and to go, maybe what we think our reality isn't fully, what it actually is. Mm-hmm. Being willing to maybe admit to some vulnerability, to admit there might be room to improve or things to address, and then having the courage to actually go forth and make a plan and to address it all. And we see this in culture writ large all the time. It was forth very powerfully in the examples and in the workshops we saw in this last session. But I think for anybody who's been battling unconscious bias from the ethics and compliance side, from the cultural side, I think a lot of what was said in this session will ring true and will be very familiar.
For sure. And just kind of, I feel like we have to pause and take all of this in. I am still unpacking it all because it was certainly very impressive. And, it's a moment where you felt seen. You felt like you were in the middle of it all. You were able to capture so much great information. You had such a great conversation all together. It's just so much to unpack. And I feel like we would certainly need more than 10 minutes to talk about this, because this is certainly an ongoing conversation. And it will be woven through everything we do at the Global Ethics Summit and in all of our topics. So it will come up from time to time. So switching gears a bit, Bill, I know Julie Ann mentioned a little bit about the technology and lighting algorithms, a lot of which is kind of rigged. I'm just curious, can you share more about that, given your background? And just, she was speaking more about how the different characters are only geared to a certain race. And this was something they had to open up to and understand.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I had heard about this before this session, and it was a particular scene in Wreck-It Ralph where Tiana is sipping a Frappuccino, and basically her facial structure and her skin tone changed in that scene from how she'd been represented before, and frankly, was not. It just didn't match, and it wasn't done properly, and it frankly looked like not as much effort was put in to make her really represent her full dimension of diversity as she was in earlier scenes in the movie. And that's when they learned that, because when you make a movie like this, lots of different teams are working on different parts at the same time. And as it turns out, the digital structure of that character's face was built off of a certain kind of racial model or ethnic model that just didn't take into account the diversity of facial structure that we see in different kinds of races around the world. And so as a result, this character was sort of, a square peg in a round hole in terms of its representation, and it fell apart. And a similar thing happened at that moment with how the algorithms that determined lighting, and it really actually played with the skin tone of the character, and these are systemic things built into the actual technology of making the movie that would reinforce a kind of unconscious bias. You have to look at who designed these algorithms, where they came from, what were they trying to originally achieve when they were first made. Did they have diversity in mind when they were made? And it's a really great example of how, apart from the artistic sides of this, apart from the storytelling and that sort of thing, it was just a matter of the mechanism of how you tell the story, the mechanism of how you do your job was in itself inherently biased. Now, the really great part of this story that I like so much is it was called out, it was seen, it was acknowledged, and it was addressed. And I think it's a really great example of how, yes, these things happen. They happen at high levels. It can be very embarrassing, but it's never too late to stop and to address, and it's never too big an issue that you can't actually address it. And I think that's the really cool thing I take.
And to certainly affect change. I think it's certainly progress to be able to draw awareness to this topic. I know it's something that was certainly probably overlooked in the past. I can tell you my background is in reporting and journalism, Bill, and when I worked on TV, it was really hard to get the lighting right. So it's I have to say now it's so impressive to see all of this is being addressed. I can tell you from 5 to 6 years ago to 10 years ago how different, and we've certainly come a long way to be able to talk about this now.
Well, but if I can say one point, I'll just add in on this, which I think is really fascinating, very, very quickly, is that towards the end we talked about in the session about the live action remake of Aladdin, and all the went in there to address the problematic aspects of the original animated version in 1992, and then how to make it more inclusive in this current version. And the proof is in the pudding. We say here that strong ethics is good business. That was absolutely the case there. The work they put into that movie not only addressed the problems that certain audiences have with that movie in the past, it then catapulted that movie to massive success, and now it's the #1 movie in the Middle East. So it's a really good proof point that you put in this work, there are massive rewards to be reaped.
Yep, and they certainly had the right stakeholders at the table, the right people weighing in, and that's important, even what we do in our business every day. So with that, we had a workshop, a mini workshop that took place. I hope, and a lot of the folks in the virtual audience did participate. I pulled some of those answers here. It was pretty interesting to see the responses that came in. The question that was asked altogether, Bill, if you are able to recap that for me, the question, for some reason, I'm having some technical difficulties here, but over to you, to the question.
So the real case study question was, we're looking at the live action version of Aladdin, and we were broken down to, when the diversity and inclusivity teams got involved, there are certain aspects of the production that were already underway. The script had been written, the director had been chosen. There are a lot of things that, things that suggest that things were in motion that had not stopped to take a pause and to really consider inclusivity from the very beginning, from the moment of inception. And so with that being the case, what would you do to try to address these things that the end product or the end project does not repeat mistakes of previous projects or does not miss an opportunity to really drive home inclusivity? And so that was that series of questions, and Julie had recommended that people take 3 of those questions and come up with an action plan around them. And it was really amazing to see what people came up with. It was pretty astonishing.
And the exact question was, what steps would you take to promote an ethical and inclusive storytelling from this point? And looking at the online responses, we had a few folks that said, start by listening to all of your stakeholders and incorporating their feedback into the process. Tapping into employee resource groups. Certainly employees are a very big brand ambassadors. These are the people you want to hear from. These are your target audience. She also shared the example of Disney celebrating Ramadan and having that time off and how much that was appreciated. A few folks in in-person audience did share a little bit more about geographic diversity, which is very important. Regional representation is what can make a whole lot of difference in this whole process. So we're almost out of time. We will certainly keep this conversation going. But Bill, any final thoughts on this topic?
Oh gosh, just I think something that Julie signed off on that was just really kind of amazing was that when you're addressing these things, and I think this goes to whether you're making a movie, whether you're trying to move the needle on your culture, commit to a plan. She said things go haywire when there's no consistency in the decisions, and you want to get a sense, you want people to see what you were doing, not ask what were they doing.
Exactly.
So I think that was a really great takeaway, and it speaks to lots of things that we're talking about here today.
And with that, coming up next at 4:30, we're going to hear more about, well, the Purple campaign, a conversation on harassment in the workplace. This session will be led by my colleague, Emily Rickaby, Director of Shared Expertise and Strategic Projects at Ethisphere. Also on this session, you'll hear from the Purple Method, Jill Lead, and Uber. So stay tuned for more. We'll be back to wrap up today's Ethicast, but stay tuned to this session coming up next.